Hello athletes, today I want to talk about motivation. I know motivation can be difficult, particularly when you're training on your own, but regardless of what our goals are, we all have different modes and methods of motivation, but there are some key points that can carry you over whether you're looking to qualify for the CrossFit Games or whether you're simply looking to maintain your health and fitness long term. So, a few things to touch on with motivation. The first is we can get a form of decision fatigue if we try and make too many decisions every day. So, my advice would be to make a single decision. And that single decision is a commitment to a long-term approach to your training. So, if you have to wake up every morning and decide what session you're going to do, you have to decide if you're going to eat healthy or not, you have to decide if you're going to train at all. There are multiple opportunities for you to make the suboptimal, the incorrect choice or decision there. Whereas if you commit long-term to say, this is the plan I'm going to stick with, this is the program I'm going to stick with, these are the guidelines that I'm going to stick with, once you've made that decision, it makes it really easy because then you wake up each morning and you simply follow through on a decision and a commitment that you've already made. So try and minimize the number of choices that you have. It can be difficult when training on your own to motivate and push yourself. So in the micro of that training session itself. And a strategy that always worked well for me, because I also always trained on my own, a strategy that always worked well for me was to picture my opponents a rep ahead. Because sometimes when training on your own, you can take your foot off the accelerator just a little bit and just enough that you're losing that intensity and losing the real stimulus of the session. So what I would do, I would always picture my opponent a single rep ahead of me. Or maybe you want to picture them a single rep behind you or on the same rep that you're on. This opponent is someone who is fighting for that qualifying position or fighting for the goal that you want to achieve. So always picture them right there with you. And it means that if you stop and rest when you possibly don't need to physically, it's that little bit extra accountability, which will hopefully keep you going. Choices. We talked about choices in terms of the amount of decision fatigue and that we want to, as much as possible, make one single choice and that choice or decision carries you through for the long term. Now, choices are often binary and it's simple to look at them in this respect. So, do I train? Do I not train? Do I eat healthy? Do I not eat healthy in a particular meal? So, how we decide which of those two options we make is often driven by our values. So, for example, if your goal is CrossFit Regionals or CrossFit Games qualification, for example, you look at the choices you have to make. And choice A is I don't train. Choice B is I train. Very simple way to make this decision. What is your primary goal, in this case qualification? Which of these two choices is going to get me closer to that goal? Very easy way to make a decision. You can do the same thing with things like injury. I've got a bit of a tweak in my shoulder. Training or not training, which is going to get me closer to that goal? And in this case, maybe it's not training. So it's a really good way to make decisions. And the choice that you make tells us a lot about your values. So if you wake up one morning and you don't feel like getting up and training and you decide to stay in bed for an extra hour, if you're very short on sleep and it's becoming chronic, then that extra hour sleep is going to be important. However, if it's just laziness and you don't feel like getting up because it's cold outside, then it tells us something about your values. It tells us that you value short-term comfort over long-term success. So this is a really good way to drive your choices. Thinking about your future self can help to shape the correct choice or the correct decision here and can help with the motivation. So you don't want to have that what if I had ... So whatever your goal is, when you get there, when you're on the starting blocks, you want to know that there is not a single thing that you could have done differently to put yourself in a better position to achieve your goals. Now, the side effect of this is if you then don't achieve this outcome-based goal, you still have a positive experience because you've done everything you could. And you know that it's simply because you weren't good enough, not because you didn't try. So you want to leave no stone unturned. And again, if you have those two choices, those binary choices, you look at these and you say, well, if I make the favorable choice here, it means I've done everything I could to prepare myself for achieving these goals. Now, there's a quote that I'm going to read out to you guys, which I really love, and it talks about how making a difficult decision in the short term can give you a positive long-term consequence. And the quote is, easy short-term choices lead to difficult long-term consequences, whereas difficult short-term choices lead to positive long-term consequences. So make the hard decision early, then you'll achieve your goals in the long term. Let's talk about self-commitment. It's a really dangerous process to go in to set yourself a goal or a promise or a habit to yourself or a commitment to yourself that you're going to keep and then break it. Because imagine someone else made a commitment to you and they broke that commitment and they did that again and again and again. It's going to tell you something about them as a person. And them continually breaking this commitment will cause you to expect this same behavior in the long term. Now, we're exactly the same when we break a commitment to ourselves. It's dangerous because it sabotages any future attempts to then create behavior change. So your mind will say, well, we've made this commitment, but we've broken a series of these commitments in the past. What are the chances that we're going to stick with this one? So it dulls and nullifies any commitment that you make. So you need to have a strong self-awareness of yourself when you're setting these commitments, because if you set a commitment to yourself that you then break because it was too difficult, we start to go down this dangerous path. So if you set a commitment, make sure it's something that is achievable for you. If there's something you don't think you'll carry through on, avoid that, stay away from it. You've got to make sure that your commitment aligns to your values. So if your values are hard work and achievement, then your commitments can help to drive that. However, if you value sleeping in, then possibly you don't set commitments to say, I'm going to get up at 4:30 every morning to train, because it's probably not realistic. You either need to work on changing your values or changing your commitments to ensure that you can complete them. Again, if you can make one small decision for a long-term behavior change, it's a lot easier than making a lot of short commitments along the way. So make sure that your commitments are driven by that long-term picture. With motivation, there are two different forms. We can have pull and we can have push. A push motivation is a big, explosive, motivational event. Maybe you're listening to Eye of the Tiger or you're watching Rocky IV on the day before a competition. And this stuff is useful because it peaks those arousal levels, which can increase your performance. It helps to psych you up. It's a big, explosive, huge motivational event. Now, this is good in the short term, but it's not very effective in the long term. And some sort of motivation requires a long-term behavior change and the long-term formation of habits. So instead of an extrinsic, external-based push motivation, we want an internal, intrinsic-based pull motivation. And a pull motivation is where instead of an event or a song, a movie that pushes you to something in the short term, there's a long-term goal, a long-term vision, which slowly draws and pulls you towards it. This is your pull motivation. Basically, a pull motivation is not as strong. It's not an explosive event. It's just a long, slow, smoldering burn. And habit formation, almost by definition, has to be long and consistent. It has to be an ongoing change in behavior, change in your patterns. So what we're looking for here with this pull motivation, an end long-term goal, and then small process goals which will get you there. Again, if you think of this using a pull analogy where you're pulling towards this end goal, or the end goal is pulling you towards it, we don't want one big pull, we want lots of small ones. So you create these process goals, because process goals are also known as habits, and it's habits that cause your long-term change.